Hello, my name is Ann McManus, and this is Government Unlocked. Today we're really fortunate to have a group of historians talk to us about Cape Cod and the Revolutionary War. And I'd like you folks to introduce yourselves because this may be your, claim to fame. So we'll start over here.
Jack Duggan from Yarmouth.
Karen Foyt from Yarmouth.
Nancy Shoemaker from West Barnstable.
Ron Peterson from Orleans.
These folks and a number of others put together a wonderful book that I really can recommend to you. I've read it several times because it really shares the story of Cape Cod and the islands during the Revolutionary War period. And I want to commend all of you. This is an excellent book, and it really whets the appetite to learn more about Cape Cod and what happened during the Revolutionary War. I know beforehand I said to you, I looked through this book several times, I read it several times, and what struck me was how instrumental Cape Cod was in many aspects of the Revolutionary War period. Not only as soldiers, but as intellectuals and ambassadors and I don't know, every other aspect really. And they seem to be on the scene at every critical point during the Revolution. So I think it's the Forrest Gump book of Cape Cod.
Here.
So I'm going to start, Nancy, with you. How did this all get off the ground?
I'm Karen.
All right.
That's Nancy. I'm
Nancy.
Karen.
Hi.
Nancy.
I was thinking, how are we going to get out of that?
Well, that's how we got out of it. Nancy, how did it all start?
Well, it started with David Martin, who you have met. He did an earlier book on pilgrims in Plymouth and Cape Cod. So I've known David forever. I'm a total history geek, and he is too. So we've probably known each other for a couple of decades. And he just decided to do this, and because he's so involved in local history, he knew a lot of historians, and very good ones. And the book just grew and grew and grew to, we say 24, 25, I think it's more like almost 30 different authors.
So
Amazing.
was the vision that large in the beginning, or did it just incrementally grow?
It was pretty large.
I think so.
It was pretty large. We basically decided on our first meeting as a group to look at the entire breadth of the war. And that's why the content was outlined that way. And then it was just coming up with the authors for the appropriate area.
It was really interesting how you crafted it, because you did talk about the period before the war and what Cape Cod was like. And I know, and you are Ron,
Yes,
correct?
I am.
I know, Ron, that you were very involved in in the history of what happened leading up to the Revolutionary War. What was Cape Cod like back then?
Well, Cape Cod was considered a backwater in those days, Barnstable being the largest community, but it was a growing, thriving community of fishermen and agriculture, and was a very vibrant backwater, so to speak. And when the revolution came, when the pre-revolution came, and the sentiment when Britain started to enact its taxes and its oppressive policies, Cape Codders responded just as others in Massachusetts and Boston did, and there were some direct connections there.
And the taxes really were a driving force as to what moved the revolution forward.
Yeah, that was the trigger, but there were antecedents before that. And I like to look at the Mayflower Compact as planting the seeds of revolutionary thought, because in Provincetown Harbor, just up the road at the other end of the Cape, when the Mayflower passengers signed that document, they actually made the first commitment in Western society to government by the people. They pledged to follow laws that they would make themselves, and they pledged to follow leaders that they would elect themselves. And that spirit, I believe, Plymouth Colony, they incorporated the compact into their government, and then Plymouth Colony was absorbed by the province of Massachusetts Bay. And I believe that the spirit of the revolution really started
With the Mayflower Compact.
with the Mayflower Compact.
Really part of Cape Cod, though, right?
Yes, yes. So that was the first Cape Cod connection, as I see it. But I like to look at John Adams's quote to Thomas Jefferson that he made after the war. And to paraphrase it, he said that the revolution wasn't about the war. The war was just a byproduct. The revolution was in the minds of the people.
Yeah, that was a great quote.
That was a great quote, and I think if you look back and you look at those years before 1763, even when the trigger was really pulled at the end of the French and Indian War, you see the resistance to British oppression from the beginning. In the 1730s, when you had the reaction to the land bank controversy, and in 1747, when there were the Boston riots, the Knowles riots against the impressment of sailors, the royal governors would call out the militia to quell the riots, and nobody showed up because all the militia members were in the crowd. They were in the crowd. So it really was in the minds of the people, and that carried through, I think, right up through 1763 when the first oppressive tax acts were, 1764 and 1765, when the first oppressive acts were really put into place. The Stamp
Because of
Act.
the French and Indian War and
Yeah.
English
They had to
government
pay a
was
bill.
like, hey, yeah.
Yeah.
But there were other things going on, too. The writs of assistance.
Oh, that was.
Could you explain what that is for our readers?
Sure. Well, the
Your
writs,
Honor,
the writs of assistance were, I think, to define it briefly, they could be compared today to very intrusive, oppressive search warrants, unlimited search warrants. And they were enacted by the British government to combat smuggling. Prior to 1761, when the writs of assistance really came to the fore, the British relied on the colonies, got their financial remuneration from the colonies through shipping, because all the shipping needed to go through Britain, and so Britain benefited from all of the colonial colonists, commerce, so to speak. But the colonists, when it was convenient, would smuggle if they could get a better deal from
Well, that was
somewhere
part of the
else.
economy, too,
It
wasn't it?
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, some things never change. And so the British, just prior to 1755, I believe it was, had renewed the writs of assistance, and they started to put into place mechanisms to enforce them. And what a writ of assistance said is that the British customs officials could conduct unlimited searches on people's ships at anchor, warehouses, businesses,
Homes.
and homes,
Oh, yeah.
most importantly. And it was Cape Cod's own James Otis that decided to he switched. He was actually a judge on the Admiralty Court, and he switched allegiances and represented 53 merchants who were fighting the writs. And he went to court and gave a 5-hour speech opposing the writs, and that was John Adams again said that then and there American independence was born.
He was a young 25 or 6-year-old in the audience, John Adams at the time.
John Adams recorded.
And James Otis was pretty young as well, correct?
He was
At that
about
time,
10 years older.
He was older, but
But so
it's still
eloquent.
relatively young.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I mean, you look at the ages too throughout your book. You've got 13-year-olds signing up to be in the Army,
Yeah.
15-year-olds,
Yes.
17-year-olds,
Yeah.
a 30-year-old presenting a 5-hour speech in the courthouse. That was, I mean, John Adams took notes on it.
Yes,
He
yeah.
was so
Yeah.
impressed by it.
I mean-
Tell us about the Otis family, because it wasn't just James, correct?
No.
James Jr.
Yeah, James Jr.
So who's the expert on that?
I live in his hometown. Yeah, his family's born in West Barnstable. The family came over in 1631. They would name their children. This is throughout all these chapters of different families. There was a James and then a James, and then before that there was a John and a John, and it gets very complicated when you're trying to look at it. But yeah, just to keep it short, was James, who was the son of the second John that came over from England. He ended up self-taught, did not go to official school. He became the judge of what I think of as the Court of Common Pleas, which is now Tales of Cape Cod's building. Not all of it, because the building was built. What are they saying now? They're debating when the building was built, but 1760s.
Yeah, just before the revolution began.
You know, before, and then it became a Baptist church, and now it's Tales of Cape Cod, which has lectures and events just like this, really. But James, he was a natural student. He would go with his brother. So James was the oldest, Joseph was next, and then Mercy. And James would go with his father to his father-in-law's church, the Meeting House, 1717 Meeting House, now in West Barnstable on Route 149. And they would get a classical education. And the sister, so James was so into it. Joseph, not so much, although he did well in life too. But Mercy would wait for her brothers to come home and say, what about this, what about that? And he finally convinced his father, that's the judge, because that's the James, older James, to let her go to the classes with him and with Joseph some of the time. But she might be the very first woman on Cape Cod to get a classical education. And lots more to tell you about her. But James went to Harvard, graduated within like 2.5, 3 years. I mean, he was just an incredibly intelligent and yet emotionally, how would you
Unstable.
describe it? Unstable.
Mental health issues.
But didn't he have? Wasn't he in? He was hit on the head.
Oh, yeah.
And
Later.
so that is when
So
things went
King
downhill.
George III, who you know about, especially from Broadway. I won't sing the song for King George III.
Oh, go ahead.
I do sometimes, I'll tell you.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That'll be another show.
Okay, all right. We'll all do a singing event sometime. Yeah. So he was coronated in October of 1760. And by February, I think it's February 24th of 1761, James was giving his big, long speech up at the State House. And, about the writs of assistance. And, the Stamp Act even you had to buy a stamp for every book, every this, that, and so on. And
Any
then,
paper, right?
yes.
Playing
yes.
cards.
And anybody, playing
Every
cards. Even. It's
card,
amazing.
every card. Yeah.
And if you didn't, you really got into a lot of trouble. Plus, also, the British soldiers were allowed to come into your house and say, I want to sleep in her bedroom. Oh, that doesn't sound good, but anyway, Anyway, but they were allowed to enter any house whenever they want. I mean, it was pretty tough. So James was very incensed over that, and also what a lot of the merchants were dealing with up in Boston. So he came home, and home was at that time Boston, and to visit his parents often in West Barnstable, across from the post office in West Barnstable. It's not there anymore, just a plaque.
Yeah.
But he was so concerned about everything, and he ended up going to a British tavern in Boston and was, of course, I'm sure, ranting and raving about what was wrong with King George III and the British government in general. And this British officer, Robinson was his last name, right? Yeah. Someone wrote that he actually held his nose of Otis, and took his cane and bashed him in the head, so that I think he probably got a frontal lobe injury. And he was always a little different, but he really didn't have a hold on life much anymore. And he ended up, he was such a major part of the American Revolution, and yet from there on couldn't be, and his sister took over, but I won't tell you about that right now. But anyway.
Well, we do need to talk about his sister, because I think, again, a real powerhouse and a Cape Codder. And if we want to see Mercy, we just need to go down to Barnstable Village, correct? Isn't
Yes,
she
that's
down
true.
there
Yeah,
standing
yeah.
in front of the courthouse?
Courthouse, yeah.
So let's talk about Mercy.
And her brother's statue is there too.
Yeah.
Yes. We love James too.
Yes, we do.
Mercy was such an intelligent person and was able to also make that bigger by going to classes and learning to read and Latin and the arts. And she was always kind of helping to take care of her brother, because he was always a little on the spectrum of something. And she took up his process. I mean, we could go on and on just about her, but she wrote what would I start? First, I should start with, there was a 19-page pamphlet she wrote of what was wrong with our government and what we should do about it. And she is one of the writers of the Bill of Rights. And people say, oh, only so-and-so or so-and-so. There were many people who put a lot into that law, and she was very much one of those. And then she also wrote the history of the American Revolution in 18, you read it more recently than I did, 10 or 12, was around there. Just an incredible woman who helped to keep her brother, her whole family going. She married James Warren and moved up to Plymouth, so she's still there.
I want to ask a question about Mercy. Did she ever have any meetings with George Washington or Martha Washington when they were in Cambridge?
They met, I know that, but the main people they worked with was the Adams family. I mean, right across the street from the Barnstable Village Old Colonial Courthouse, which, by the way, is only one of two left in America. The other one's in Plymouth. But she would go to the tavern, Crocker Tavern across the street, and listen to these things. And then also up at her home, they had two different homes in Plymouth, but this is the one on North and Main Street, which is still there. She would listen to all of them. She would take notes. She was very much a part of it.
Yes.
Wasn't she like best friends with Abigail Adams? Yes.
There was a little moment of not, but yeah, mostly.
Yes,
There's a
yes.
little falling out there.
But also the committees of correspondence, her home was.
I would like to talk a little bit about that, because, you know, in this day and age, we know how we communicate. We've got email and all of that. Here we had people traveling. What I would say, a walk to Boston is not inconsequential. So taking a horse to Boston, I think, would be a couple days anyhow, if you had to walk even longer than that. How did the messages get across? I mean, how did the information, James Otis's, you know, what he was talking about in Boston, how did that get communicated around Cape Cod and the rest of Massachusetts? And I think those committees of correspondence were somewhat critical to communication. So how did that work? And how were they created?
Well, Massachusetts got excited and figured that they needed to have a way to spread the word out. This is from Boston, was the original committee of correspondence. Right. And they started sending word out to the other towns to get to feel what was their inklings about all of this. This is 1772, the Boston pamphlet. But there was a system of established, basically, post boys who just get on you have a letter, you want to go talk to Ron, and you send this 12-year-old kid on a horse, and they would ride off.
And
And
the
these were-
Boston newspapers
Yes,
were
the Boston
alive and
newspapers.
thriving, and that's where a lot. That's
Yes,
where a
the
lot of that
Boston
information
newspapers,
spread.
newspapers were rapidly becoming more and more important throughout the colonies.
Yeah.
And it was really organized. These weren't just people who were sitting around the coffee shop or a bar to set these up. The towns were really involved in
Yes,
these committees.
yeah.
So people were assigned to the committees from each town on Cape Cod.
Or
And
they
every-
volunteered. That's one of the things that is so wonderful about Massachusetts. They took the lead on all of this, and all the towns had these groups.
I think also, Ron will correct me if I'm wrong on this, that committees of correspondence on the Cape, for Cape towns, came in various packages. Some towns were involved very early after the original Boston message, and others came in later.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And I think the records show that all but maybe one or two towns responded very positively to the Boston Committee of Correspondence. And the other two wasn't because they didn't respond, there just aren't records that document it. But, and I would add, in addition to the committee and to the newspapers, there was also pamphlets that were published that were extremely influential. And that was a tool that Mercy Otis Warren had used. Her plays, several of her plays were reprinted into pamphlets.
They weren't
And,
performed. They were just
They were never
yeah,
performed.
just in the newspapers, and always with a man's name.
Yes,
As the
good,
author.
because- 'cause
So
God
she
for-
did not get credit for those.
Oh, no, God forbid a woman had no
interesting.
place in politics in those days.
You know,
she had
nobody's-
to be anonymous,
Not publicly,
not
but they sure
publicly.
talked to their husbands.
Oh, they did, and Mercy was brilliant. I mean, it's beyond comprehension, the contributions that she made, and fortunately now she's started to get credit
Yeah,
for
yeah.
it. But
In fact,
know-
in 1992, I was on the board of Tales at Cape Cod. A woman came in from New Jersey and said, "You all know about Mercy Otis Warren," and every one of us, huh? I mean, we really didn't know. We had heard her name as part of Otis family. It's a recent thing that people are finally giving her the credit for what
And
she
now there's
did.
an award named after her,
Pardon me?
right? There's an award named after her.
Yes,
Yes,
right,
yeah.
right.
Woman of the Year on the
Yeah,
Cape, is
yeah,
it?
yeah.
Well, just think how impressive it is that, I mean, that powerful, articulate woman and her brothers, the impact they had
She
on
made
the
a difference.
revolution.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
There's one thing I just want to, you're talking about communication and how word gets spread. Nobody's mentioned the fastest form of communication between Boston and the Cape, and that's packets.
Yes.
You know, you could walk, you could take a horse, but a boat can move a lot faster
Yes.
with pamphlets, with newspapers,
Yes.
with rumors,
Yeah.
you know, one of the things that is unclear to me is how did word arrive on the Cape of the battles at Lexington and Concord and the fight along Revolutionary Road? How did the Cape learn about that?
And they learned about it pretty quickly, right?
They marched the next day.
Yeah. Didn't
But-
they
So how
went to
did they
Marshfield,
Some
right?
some were preparing on the 19th, some were preparing on the 20th, but word got here, and then several militia companies, a half a dozen of them, started heading toward. A lot of people assumed it was Lexington and Concord, but it wasn't. It was actually Marshfield, where there was a small British garrison. But they didn't get as far. They didn't get very far.
Sandwich.
Before word coming in the other direction said, "It's all over, boys.
Go home.
Go home." The Marshfield British garrison there of about 100 troops had been evacuated the day after Lexington and Concord, when the British general in Boston realized he had 100 people very exposed and a very large mob of militia and fishermen and sailors from Plymouth on the verge of attacking them. He withdrew his troops. But packets was a way that word got here about everything.
You know, it's really funny, looking at the book, I remember that portion where I know that certain portions of the militia got so far. Some only got to Sandwich, some got up to Plymouth. I think some got to Marshfield, but they all put in for recompense. The towns did to get paid for it.
2
the
days,
food.
2 days in the pension records, yes.
The only record that I've ever seen of how or when, not so much how, but when the word got to at least some of the militias men was from a Sandwich diary of a fellow who kept the classic diary. You know, it rained today and it was cold next Wednesday or whatever. And in that, he was a Sandwich militiaman. And his name has gone back into my back of my brain. But he kept a diary like that, and there was a line about him being activated, his company being activated, and then on the 20th probably, a little entry that we got word that the fighting was over and we turned around and came back. But that's it. That's this little one-sentence snippet, and you'd have to know that the guy was a militiaman to
Put it together.
put the dots together,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So.
Other things were happening. Things were happening in Boston at, around that time period. We have the Tea Party, but it seemed like Cape Cod had a role in that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So does somebody want to share with us the story of the William? I know David shared it with me, but I think folks would like to hear it. And also, the journey from the Cape to Boston. Was it to Boston? Or yeah, it was to Boston.
yeah.
Yeah, well, the people are all familiar with the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver. They were 3 tea ships that sailed after Britain enacted the Tea Act and empowered the British East India Company to have a monopoly on tea sales in the colonies. And the 3 of those ships arrived in Boston Harbor, and they were subject to the Tea Party. What people don't know as much about is the fact that there was a 4th tea ship, the William, who was headed along with the other 3 ships to Boston Harbor, and it wrecked in, as best I can tell, fairly close to where the Somerset wrecked, off Race Point, Peaked Hills Bar.
And I guess that was pretty common. That
Provincetown.
ships would
It was
go
a
around
graveyard.
there, yeah.
It was a graveyard for ships, particularly in storms. And the tea was salvaged. The crew all survived. They were able to get the tea ashore. And
You wonder what it was packaged in, and it wasn't salty.
I can't figure.
I wondered that too, because some of the damaged
Yeah.
tea was given away, right?
I can't. They
but-
were in chests. They were in heavy chests.
Okay.
And
Maybe they
however
floated.
they did it, they did it. But there were 55 chests that were on board the ship, and the crew got them ashore. And to make this is a long story, so I'll try
Sit back.
I'll try to shorten it. William Greenough was a Wellfleet resident, and he was the first official on the scene. And he was the Justice of the Peace in Wellfleet. He was also a school teacher, and he owned a business that, in part, dealt with salvaging cargoes from shipwrecks. But he actually recruited some local laborers and got them to take the tea. And there were also street lamps on the William that were headed for Boston.
But there was a lot of controversy around this,
Oh,
correct?
oh,
I mean, the people in
oh,
Boston
oh.
really wanted that tea dealt with in a certain
Well,
way.
yeah. The fact is that the owner, Richard Clark and Sons, Richard's son, Jonathan, made it out to Provincetown, and he immediately wanted to take control of the tea and get it shipped to Boston so they could sell it. And they went to all of the sea captains that were in Provincetown, and none of the captains would take the cursed tea. The tea was absolutely verboten. They did agree to take the street lamps, but none of them would touch the tea. And they kept searching, and they found this captain of a fishing vessel who was from Salem, and he had put into Provincetown Harbor to avoid the storm, probably the same storm that wrecked the William. And he agreed to take the tea to Boston, and he did. There were 53 chests or 52. I forget the exact numbers, but there were several chests that were damaged that remained on the Cape. But most of the tea from the William made it to Boston, and Governor Hutchinson had it stored in the Army barracks on Castle Island for safekeeping. The leadership in Boston was furious at the Cape Codders for not dealing with the tea the same way that
And they were taking it and bringing it to the Cape and selling it, weren't they?
Well, and I think
not
that
from.
Some of the Cape Codders
Oh
were.
well,
yeah.
the damaged chests that remained, Greenough kept control of those,
right.
and it was his opinion that he could sell the tea because it wasn't taxed. You know, the objection was towards Britain
Right.
taxing the tea, and here was British tea, but it wasn't taxed. So he believed that he could sell it, and he did. He sold one chest to Stephen Atwood, who was a Provincetown merchant, and he sold another part of a chest to Willard Knowles, who was the head of the militia in Eastham. And there was just this huge uproar that lasted for months, and the subject of town meetings, and there was violence. Stephen Atwood's house was broken into, and the tea was found and brought outside and burned.
The tea was a
merchants-
symbol.
The merchants who, the laborers who carried the tea to Provincetown were all paid in tea. And they were accosted and the tea taken from them. And every house in Provincetown was searched. And any tea that was found was brought outside and burned. So there was this huge controversy, but through a series of town meetings in each of the towns, they finally came to a resolution, and basically the people on the Cape accepted the idea that untaxed tea was okay. You could buy it and sell it. So Willard Knowles and Stephen Atwood and John Greenough were all basically exonerated, and Greenough ended up selling the rest of his tea. It was gone by May. But it showed the differences of opinion that existed within the patriotic movement. It wasn't all cut and dried.
Well, it was real democracy.
It was real democracy.
As opposed to the precursor to our town meetings, when they can be pretty exciting too.
Well, these were all, and town meetings would meet consecutively in the records. On the one hand, the first town meeting in Eastham excoriated Knowles for buying the tea and attempting to sell it. And one of the town meeting voted to order the select board to take away the weapons that Knowles had as colonel of the militia. They refused to do it, and one of the selectmen was threatened with being tarred and feathered. But then when they came back in the next town meeting, they said, no, that's okay, he can sell the tea.
Well, some things really haven't changed on the Cape.
No, they haven't. And town meetings, we know today.
We don't tar and feather anymore.
But the outcome
Sure
of
get
town meetings
animated.
depends on who shows up. That hasn't changed.
Very true.
Yeah, I can't speak for other towns on the Cape, but I know in Yarmouth, at some point prior to the William being shipwrecked and the tea coming ashore, the town of Yarmouth formed a committee of about 10 people with the express direction to make sure no tea was consumed in the town. And when you look at the list of names, some names jump right out as, the town father category. So it implies a seriousness to preventing tea from being consumed. How long it lasted,
Yeah.
maybe after the Williams tea came ashore, Maybe
Yeah.
it was
Got the
honored
ball
in
rolling.
advance.
There was a woman named Nabby Freeman who lived 2 doors to the east of the old colonial courthouse. Court of Common Pleas was what it was called then. And she would walk across the street. So there was the Crocker Tavern, which was the ones who wanted to revolt. Then there's the ones who were King George, that's it, we love him. So she would come out and go by the Liberty pole and say, they should take that damn thing down, you know. So a few of the people got together, went to her house where she also had a general store and was selling some tea. They tarred and feathered her and brought her out into Barnstable Village main section, and then finally did release her. But
Well, you know,
He
it
was-
it was clear, though, things were starting to escalate.
Yeah.
You had the
Yes,
loyalists, and then you
Yeah.
had what we would refer to as the patriots.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and things continued to, you know, become more complicated. You have the issue at the courthouse, which I think we'd like to talk about that a little bit. You had 1,500 Cape Codders show up at the courthouse because England had made a decision that no longer would the people be able to decide who would be the judges
the
and the
jurors
governors and all of
yeah.
that. That would be controlled in
Yeah.
England. So what happened then?
Well,
We could all tell you that
it's
one.
back
Yes.
to- back to Ron.
Boy, that's for sure.
I don't know. I'll tell the first
Well,
half.
yeah,
You tell
that-
us-
well,
you
that-
tell
well,
the
that
sto-
was
yeah.
that was a result of the Coercive Acts and
Yes.
the Massachusetts Government Act, whereby the local control over all aspects of government were taken away.
Take it away.
And royal officials were appointed to replace locally elected officials, and part of it involved the Barnstable issue was driven by the fact that how jurors and sheriffs were selected, and
And
that
they were
led to
appointed as well by the Crown, correct?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah. That was all changed. Every vestige of local control was taken away in the Coercive Acts, and that's what led to the march.
And the Otis family comes into play at that
Oh,
point
yeah.
again.
Actually, on their way from Sandwich to Barnstable, they even stopped by Colonel James Otis, the judge of the Court of Common Pleas, to see if he was still there, and he wasn't. He was, I guess, thank heavens, was up in Barnstable Village. But he was going to open the courthouse still, and finally he got convinced not to, and they walked across the street to the Crocker Tavern, and the rest is history.
And the history is he supported the group of people who were protesting.
He did eventually, but you know, it took some time. I think he was one of those, wouldn't you say he was one that kind of
Yeah,
waited and thought, yes, that's not good, but we shouldn't disturb anything, you know. But no, he did become someone who cared about the unwise rule and all those writs of assistance and the Coercive Act, the Stamp Act, you know, it just went on and on.
Well, now let's move a little forward. We become a country at war. The British are now not putting up with anything that the Patriots are doing, and there are actually battles happening.
Oh.
We had was there not a battle on Cape Cod?
Kind of. In Falmouth.
Yeah.
Falmouth. Yeah.
Yeah, Falmouth was, you want to tell
No,
them?
no, you go ahead.
Falmouth, the British ships were there off of Falmouth and up around into facing actually what is now the town of Falmouth, and I'm in the center of it. And they were finding out that things weren't working that day so well. They went off down, this is the Brits, went off to the Elizabethan Islands. Which one was it? The Tarpaulin?
Yes.
Might have been, okay. And so there, all the British guys are there. Well, tomorrow we're gonna go and we're gonna kill everybody in town. We're gonna burn all their buildings.
Yes.
And the gentleman who ran the tavern was actually a loyalist, but he didn't think this was right, that people should be killed. And he sent his son, and his son was young.
10, I think.
Yeah, something, 8, 9, or 10, yeah. Out on his boat from Elizabethan Islands going off to Falmouth and let people know that night that this was going to happen the next morning. And so the next morning, they arrive in their ships, and there's all these stone walls and barricades. How they ever made this in 8 hours or something. And they actually turned around and left because
Yes,
there
so
were
they-
a few cannonballs that made it over to Falmouth, but not many. And then what's the name of the tavern that had one ball stuck in its
yes,
wall, and
yeah.
they tore the
Yes,
building
yeah.
down fairly recently.
But the local militia responded, and when the British saw the fortifications, such as they were, and the numbers of people, they backed off. But this was part of a much larger British raiding force that had already come down and laid waste to quite a number of places along the south shore of Massachusetts at Dartmouth and New Bedford.
Yeah.
And then we're heading toward Falmouth when they just ran out of steam. But I think that's probably the only battle per se on the Cape. I would venture to guess that there's skirmishes that occurred because British raiding parties, particularly down in the North Shore, Elizabeth Islands area, were coming ashore regularly. And, think about all the troops in Boston. They had to get food, they needed hay for their horses, that kind of stuff. And so there all these naval foraging parties would go out, and then they'd put Marines ashore and take what they wanted, kind of stuff. There's a great story, but it's a story of a skirmish at Great Island in Yarmouth, and the entrance to the Hyannis Harbor there. And it talked about a several-hour exchange of fire with a British raiding party between local militia on a Sunday, no less. So everybody had to come from church to respond to this alleged event. It's a great story found in a pension file, but nowhere that I could find, or other people I asked about it, could corroborate the story. So it's nice to know about it. I would have thought that anything that lasted several hours with Marines, British Marines, and a man of war or a couple of frigates standing offshore, and local militia responding with a shooting event would have made it into some other oral history tale or a payroll record where somebody wanted to get paid for their duty on the alarm.
We'd be remiss if we didn't dig in a little bit to the role of the militias and the common man who was involved in fighting the Revolutionary War. Many Cape Codders joined militias, many joined the Continental Army
Yeah.
at very young ages. At least we'd consider them very young ages.
Weren't they required to be a part of the militia?
In
If
Falmouth, they were.
Yes.
I don't know about the other towns. Do you?
I think
Yes.
most men between like the ages of 16 and
Yeah.
60 were required to do some kind of service in town, and mostly I think it was militia companies that did drills periodically in the towns, and it's structured. Each town had militia companies of some sort and number, and then it went into once the revolution began, it went into a county arrangement. So there was a kind of a pyramid going up with a county colonel, a regimental colonel, a lieutenant colonel. One of the lieutenant colonels for a number of years, a fellow named Enoch Hallett from Yarmouth, was the deputy to this regimental unit. He was also the county's high sheriff. So he was wearing two hats because he was organizing militias and directing them. And as the sheriff, he was also keeping an eye out for loyalists. And you could see little records here and there. And apparently he had spies, but again, that's kind of shaky evidence. It sounds plausible,
Yeah,
but
sure.
Why not? But militia companies then, somewhere, I'm trying to remember the exact date, but probably around before Lexington and Concord, began to form Minuteman companies, which were different than regular militia companies. They were made up of younger, more fit men. They did more training. They got paid. On the alarm to Lexington, Concord, Marshfield, 3 Yarmouth militia companies responded. One from the West Precinct, one from the East Precinct, and a Minuteman company, a specifically identified Minuteman company. So there was that. Each town probably had a similar kind of arrangement. I think if you used a big picture look at who served, who were veterans in Yarmouth, you could say that most veterans were militiamen. And the Continental Army came in a distant second. And there were groups of smaller subgroups in which men served in both militia and the Continental Army. They did both. And then there were sailors and who were Massachusetts Navy, Continental Navy, and privateers. And the records specifically on privateers, I don't think we'll ever know the magnitude of how many Cape men served on privateers, but it's a pretty good educated guess that given the maritime history of the Cape, a lot did.
Jack, could you talk a little bit about the role of African Americans in fighting
Yeah.
with militias or in the Continental
Well,
Army?
they did all three. And I'll start with why did I look at it in the first place? Aside from Dave Martin encouraging me repeatedly encouraging me to do it. I had a COVID project that I started for Yarmouth, in which I took it on myself to try to identify as many Yarmouth veterans of the Revolution as I could. And so I'm plodding through this and had lots of free time on my hands and was uncovering quite a number of names. And one of the names was a man without a surname. His name was just Ezra. And he served in the Continental Army. And he might have been a boy. He might have been a teenager. We don't know anything about him. He's listed in, there's a very clear Continental Army record for Ezra. And he's known as Ezra Negro, and spelled in 3 different ways. And he served in a regiment made up of mostly Plymouth and Barnstable County men, and there are pretty clear Continental Army records that show that he enlisted in the spring of 1777. He was present at the battle at one of the 2 battles at Saratoga. His unit went into winter camp at Valley Forge, the most awful camp at Valley Forge, and it showed that he died in March of 1778. And that's it. That's it. We don't know anything about him, but he enlisted for the town of Yarmouth. He exists. He was in a record. He's this pay for him. And I was just always curious. It's like, who is he? How old is he? Where did he come from? Was he a slave? Was he a free man? When he died, did anybody in his unit write a letter back home to say Ezra has passed on? I got a couple of clues. There was a militia captain in Yarmouth who had a servant for life, which was a euphemism for slavery, by the name of Ezra. That's all. We have a second clue that it was a female slave to a merchant in the town of Truro who had 3 children, one of whom was named Ezra and born about he was of military age. But all the trails run dry. They just fade away. That was the beginning, and it was like, who is this guy? And then I started kicking around, and then I joined this group of now my friends. I said I would go to one meeting.
Yes, you did. Yes.
We have all fueled each other and learned from each other.
And then I stayed, and then I got talked in at various things. But so that was the kernel of all of this. Who is this person? And history is about remembering and stories and trying to prove something as factual base. And Dave kept pushing, and I finally said, okay, I'll look. And then my curiosity got the best of me. And then I began to find other black veterans. And it was like picking at something. And I should say, as a background, it's hard to find decent factual information about the service of men in the militia and the Continental Army, all those other places. It's hard to find that in general. It's even harder to find it about black veterans for all kinds of reasons, I imagine. But I found stuff, and I found a list of 60 or 70 black veterans, and I decided what I wanted to do.
From the Cape.
From the Cape. But it was just a list. There was no
No detail.
It was a list.
Yeah.
With not even a footnote. There was I guess there was a footnote from the DA, the big, sort of watershed DAR research on African American and Native American veterans. But I wanted to prove something, and I wanted to look for baseline information to document that these, in fact, were black they were black veterans of the war in one capacity or another. So that's what I used as my baseline. And I eventually found the names of 30 men, boys too, teenagers. So this kind of range of age, from young teens to, a couple of guys in their 30s. I think there might have been one guy at, mid 40s or something like that. So I've got 30 names now that I know from military records, clearly black veterans of the war. That number, I shouldn't say I could. Somebody might be has the potential to double that number. There were like 1,200 veterans identified, black veterans of the Revolutionary War from Massachusetts. It's documented in the DAR study. And there's probably more than that. But because record keeping was so spotty, it's really hard to tell. So you look at military records, you look at payroll records and enlistment records. You look at military pension files, and then you try to nose around with whatever clues that come your way that show other things related to the lives of veterans, black or white or Native American. And you try to put stories together. And so out of that 30, which could potentially double, I found, I don't know what the number is, 5 or 6 that I found factoids, if you will, okay? Mm-hmm. Stories about their military service or, thank God, their lives after the military. Because that's one of the fun parts about this research. If they survived the war.
Mm-hmm.
What their lives were like,
well, yeah, what did they do? Because most of these people were kids.
Yeah.
It's like today.
Yeah.
Soldiers are young.
Yeah.
Generals are old. And colonels are old. So I found maybe 5 or 6, enough that I could do I'll just dignify it more than it deserves in a second, mini profiles, because I had enough facts. And I think I was saying to you earlier that the facts are like an accordion. Sometimes there are a lot of them, and sometimes there's just a few. And you're able to tell stories, little mini stories that are all they're complete enough that I would tell you about them, or I put them in this book, but they're not complete in the sense of a full story, because there's always pieces of the puzzle
still out there that
they're
need
out
to be
there
explored.
someplace.
Yeah.
Or they were, and then the records have just disappeared.
But getting pensions and so forth was.
Boy, if that's the goal of research, to get the pension files. But you can also look at the units that these guys served in, and you can say to yourself, well, where were they? So, where was Colonel Bradford's regiment? What did this militia company do? Or if you got the name of a ship, sometimes they get lucky, you could then try to find the ship, right? That kind of stuff. And I'll just give you I'll just throw out some factoids. Of the black veterans, 2 of them were at the surrender at Yorktown. Both of them were under Lafayette. One of them was sent detailed to Lafayette's division that Washington sent south from New York in the spring and summer of 1781 with the express direction to harass Cornwallis, but don't get caught. And he went off with that. Those are elite units, elite light infantry units. The other guy was a drummer who warmed up for Yorktown by getting in the battle at King's Bridge in New York in a really nasty firefight in which quite a number of people died and were wounded. So 2 of these veterans were veterans of Yorktown. Others served at places like Saratoga and Monmouth. Most black veterans, the majority of them were Continental Army soldiers.
Didn't they go out to see some of them too?
Some went to sea, but again, with only one exception, the records for the few who went to sea, I don't know because I couldn't find them.
Yeah.
But I think, think about, you ask yourself questions now. Why did the majority of black soldiers join the Continental Army? So you end up making guesses. There were land bounties and pay bounties. And there was pay, probably more than militia. And some of these veterans, and I don't know what the split is of the 30, how many were enslaved and how many were free men. But the men who were slaves might have done it for the bounties because they could, when the war ended, if they survived, could have bought their way out of slavery.
So for many of them, it was an avenue for a better life.
Hopefully.
Yeah, but hope for
So
a better
our
A
life.
hope,
assumption.
because
yeah,
It's our
exactly. The hope
assumption.
for
Societies,
Yeah.
societies, it's the same. It was the same. These black veterans came home to anonymity and hostility, and probably no great appreciation for what they did. Although I think in one case I was struck by the number of, for a man named Peter Boston from Nantucket. He and his brother were both veterans of maritime veterans. No record for Silas. Peter had of even a pension file, but Peter's pension file was just chock full of information, and there was civilian information about him available too. But the number of prominent white residents of Nantucket who stepped up and gave depositions on his behalf of a man of great character was just amazing.
Yeah.
So it's all those, there's a lot of individual stories here, you know. History is about remembering and what you can remember. And-
There's always something new too that we
well,
find
it is,
out.
and it's, you know, I said before too, the work's in progress.
absolutely.
This is a work in progress. I said I had 30, but they could be double. You know,
More to learn.
there is,
Yeah.
always. It's
It
always
Started
going on.
with one.
Yeah.
But it
30's
started
pretty
with one,
good.
yeah, and that's,
Yeah.
give me 60 more seconds, I'll tell you a sandwich.
Okay.
Here's a sandwich connection, because we're
Oh,
on
well, then go ahead.
SCTV, right? One of the black veterans is unusual. His name is Fortune Howland. He served in 2 different Continental regiments, one from Rhode Island and one from Massachusetts. Continental, it was a Continental regiment, even though it had a kind of funny name in Rhode Island. He also served in the militia. And his Massachusetts enlistment credits his Continental Army to the town of Sandwich. But, you know, I said facts are accordion like this, some and there isn't. Howland clearly was from Rhode Island. I'm guessing he was a slave at some point and became free. He married twice. He lived long enough to get a pension. His Continental Army service was credited to this town. And then he moved off to somewhere up on the South Shore. And then he came back to Sandwich, and he got married for the second time. And then he left Sandwich, and he moved over to Dartmouth, where he got his pension and died. And I know this much. I know that I found his probate record. And his probate record shows he had very little money at the time of his death. And I think the lawyers probably took more of it than they should have, because I could see the accounting. But in the accounting, $2 was paid for his coffin and $1 for his gravesite, somewhere over in Fairhaven.
Sounds just like nowadays.
So here's a mystery, the incomplete story, the work in progress.
Yeah.
Where is he buried? I've done a little picking. But so if there's someone out here and listening
is
to
always fun,
SCTV who
So
has
there's a
some-
volume 2 that has to be done.
Yes,
Right.
but wouldn't it
I
be
keep
great to
telling them this.
find where he's buried and give him the honor of some sort of a medallion on the gravesite? Or
Speaking of honor, we have to talk about what this lady did. She edited the whole book and over and found nuances and made it, I think, more readable for you and
Thank
just
you.
incredible. Karen.
Well, the pictures, and also it was really compelling, the choices that were made, because it brings you along with a story, but then at the end, when we talk about the individual players, you really do more of a deep dive to let you get to know the people a little bit more. So
That was a good
Yeah.
section there.
yeah,
yes.
it really was.
It was an honor to work on something like that. And Karen got a lot of the back gloss. Did you do the glossary?
Yes.
And also the
bibliography
the-
and the references.
and the,
yeah.
of different historical societies in
But
the Cape.
the challenge with a book like this is you have several dozen authors, and how do you make a cohesive whole?
Well,
So that's-
could you talk a little bit about that? Because as I read it, it was cohesive.
It
Yeah.
flowed.
And
yeah.
how do you pull that off? Because how many
Copy
authors are
editing.
there?
It's copy editing. You just make sure that the words are similar.
So there's a lot of creative license in this.
No,
A little bit of creative
no.
license.
Most of the articles, I verified every fact to make sure they were correct.
Amazing.
And then I
What a
made
huge
sure that
amount of
if I
work.
used a
Yeah.
word in Ron's article, that it would be the same in Jack's article, if there was a reference.
Amazing, amazing.
These two folks here did unbelievable work. I got talked into this to write stories, and I never anticipated the hard work that came in the last 4 or 5 months that these two led.
Well,
It's unbelievable.
you all should really take a lot of credit for this because it's a wonderful gift to all of us on Cape Cod.
I don't think we want to take a lot of credit. We're just so happy that people are enjoying the book and learning from it.
And what I loved is finding out how many people on the Cape are truly interested in this.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
definitely.
You know, and that there were so many hidden gems of people who were willing to write for it.
And we need to keep
Yes.
history, whether it's American
Yes.
Revolution, War of 1812, or World War II, or not a war, but we need to remember that the young people will care just as much as we do about history if we only introduce it to them.
And they do.
And you know,
And
the
they do.
parallels between what happened then and many of the things that are happening today are really, they draw me because I think we learn lessons. And you know, you've heard the expression "history repeats itself." Well, in individual stories, you see that. You know, and
Your
it's
Forrest Gump.
yeah.
You know, the Forrest Gump analogy was great. When you
Yeah.
mentioned that, it was just like, one of the things that struck me about what I read, what my colleagues put together, and the things that I was working on was the youth involved in this, of how many young people did incredible things as teenagers,
Yeah.
or in their early 20s, and then
Well, it was a different world then, for sure. And I think you grew up a lot faster, for sure.
that 13-year-old that you mentioned, I think is one of the tailors.
Yeah.
He became he served 2 or 3 militia tours, joined his brother in a Continental Army regiment, and when he mustered out in 1780, he was a sergeant.
Yeah. Yeah.
What and he left nothing behind that we know of, and he didn't live long enough for a pension. But what was that kid's experience?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this just scratches the surface.
Yeah.
So I think you have really, you certainly, you've got a document here that is a living thing that can grow and change. And I applaud you for doing this work. And I want to thank you all for being here today with me. I think I've learned a lot, a little more than I knew beforehand. And
We thank you for
we
asking
thank
us to
you,
come.
yes.
I certainly
really-
learned a lot.
I really hope people will go out and buy this book.
Yes.
And I know you can get it at all the independent bookstores around Cape Cod, and certainly call historical societies.
museums, yeah.
And museums.
And watch out for the lectures that are being given.
Yeah.
Yes,
Our
that's
authors,
how
yes.
I first became
Yeah.
aware of this. I went to Dr. Martin's lecture, and I was really blown away by the parallels, because you're so inundated with what's going on here today. But to take that journey with Dr. Martin and his lecture really was really inspiring.
Yeah.
So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Yeah.
Thank you
that
for
is
telling
it
us.
today for Government Unlocked. Look forward to future shows where we'll discuss other aspects of our history and our government. And have a good day. Thank you.